So, a valid rule or an invalid rule does one of four things. It has one of four defects. The first is it contradicts an a fortiori qiyas. That's called qiyas al-awla, as they say. Okay? So, if a judge were to rule, for example, based on the testimony of a harbi is an enemy, right? He would say that decision has to be repealed. Why? Because you can't judge using the testimony of a dissolute Muslim, a fasiq. Okay? So, bil-awla, you can't rule using the testimony of an enemy who's out to destroy you. Okay? So, if the rule that the judge adopts violates an a fortiori analogy, then it's an invalid rule, and his judgment is lahu. It just doesn't count. It's yunqad, repealed. Second, qawad amma. So, for Qarafi, one of the things that the fuqaha have done is they've created lots and lots and lots of general rules, universal rules. Okay? So if the judge's ruling contradicts a qa'ida, okay, then it's not a valid case of legal reasoning. And again, the rule must be overturned. Okay? For some reason, I can't think of an example now. Third, let's say if he rules based on his own knowledge of the case. Okay? So he's violating the qa'ida that says that a judge can only rule based on a bayyina, based on objective proof. Okay? So if the judge rules using his own knowledge of the facts, then that is going to be overturned. Third, nas. Again, meaning explicit rule. If the judge's ijtihad contradicts an explicit rule, then it's not valid. Okay. And then fourth, if it violates ijma'. If the judge's rule violates ijma', then it has to be overturned. So what's interesting about this is that Qarafi is not saying that a judge must follow a rule of a mujtahid imam. So there's a kind of discretion that he's giving judges in making rules. Okay? But it can't violate the basic principles of the rationality of the system. Right? So it can't be an arbitrary ruling. We already know that Qarafi believes that the ruling of the mujtahid is not rationally determined, in the sense that reasonable people can disagree about what the rule should be. Because he's an Ash'ari, very fanatic one at that too. So he rejects the notion that all rational people must agree on what the rule is. But he also accepts the notion that reason is sufficiently robust as to delimit the set of possible, plausible answers. Right? So again, it's an intermediary position between rational determinism, and let's say solipsism. Solipsism meaning anything you believe to be true is true, right? So there's a kind of judicial decision making sort of operates in this intermediate domain between that was rationally determined and what you subjectively want the outcome to be as a judge. Okay. Any questions on that? Oh, one other thing, but this is very interesting. Sometimes, though, the ruling can even be upheld if it violates one of these. He says, finally there has to be the absence of a mu'arid. Sorry, my handwriting is really bad. So, the judge can, in certain cases, violate one of these four principles if there's a mu'arid, if there's a countervailing consideration that is worthy of it. So I'll give you one example. The example he gives is in Maliki fiqh, if you own dates, okay, you don't wait until harvest day to calculate your obligation for zakat. There's somebody supposed to come from the government called the kharis. He's sort of the tax collector. His job is to estimate the quantity of dates you will harvest on harvest day. Okay? So if he comes and he estimates that you are going to harvest a quantity that obliges you to pay zakat, he calculates it for you immediately and gives you a bill. So according to Malik, that bill is binding no matter what. Even if harvest day comes and you only harvest half of that amount, it doesn't matter. You still have to pay the bill that the tax collector gave you. Now this violates the qawa'id, the qaida that a hukm must be based on proper evidence. So in the ordinary case, if we discover that the judge's ruling was based on false testimony of a witness, that's ground to overturn the prior ruling. But in this case, the determination of the kharis is absolutely unchallengeable, according to Malik. And Al-Qarafi says it's because there's a valid mu'arid, the mu'arid being maslaha. Because he said, if it were not for this rule, then we would have to send guards to basically sequester date trees and grapevines and not allow owners to approach them until harvest day. Because the difference between dates and grapes and, let's say, cereals is that you can eat dates and grapes straight off the tree, right, before you harvest them. Whereas with wheat, you have to chop it down and thresh them, etc. Okay? So owners would have an incentive to go into their orchards at night and eat them, right? Between the time that the tax collector comes and harvest date, right? And so what economists call a moral hazard. Okay? So because of that, that's a mu'arid, according to Qarafi, maslaha requires that this be binding, and it's beneficial both for the poor because now you've got a set obligation for zakat, and it's beneficial for the rich, the owner, because now they're free to use their property. Okay? Yes? Oh, okay. Okay. It's 8:20. I'll stop now. But there are lots of other interesting things because the judge is not the only person that sort of specifies a universal in particular circumstances. But we're running out of time, so let's just stop here. Okay. Thank you.